Hello, and welcome to the Earth's Library. Find a comfortable position and allow the noise and the hurry of your day to soften at the edges. Settle into this quiet space and bring your awareness to the simple, steady rhythm of your own breath, feeling it move in and out. Tonight, we are not opening a book of answers, but are instead listening to a quiet and ancient question. It is a question that can arise when you are looking at a vast star-filled sky, or feeling the deep, silent presence of an old forest. It is the idea that the world we live on is not just a beautiful, intricate stage for life, but is perhaps the main character of the story. The possibility that the whole of our planet, the rock, the water, the air, and all the life it holds, might be woven together into a single planetary mind. The question is this: could the Earth, in some vast, slow, and silent way, have a consciousness of its own? As that thought settles gently in the air, allow me to ask you something much smaller. Where are you listening from right now? Is your room wrapped in the deep stillness of night? Or is the first soft light of dawn beginning to touch your window? Wherever you find yourself, we are here together in this quiet moment, sharing this exploration. If this is a journey you wish to take again, consider subscribing to the Earth's Library and giving this documentary a like. It helps this space find others who are searching for a calm place to wonder. And now, with that question as our guide, let us begin our inquiry by listening for the slow, deep rhythms of the world, searching for the pulse of a planetary heartbeat. To search for a planetary heartbeat is to learn to listen on a different scale of time. The pulse of a living world would not be a rapid, anxious rhythm, but a slow, deep, and ancient one, a cadence measured in seasons, tides, and ages. The first and most intimate of these rhythms is the one we live inside every day, the steady turning of the planet itself. This 24-hour cycle of light and darkness is the Earth's most fundamental breath. It is a pulse that has synchronized nearly every form of life. It is written into the chemical clocks of our own cells, in the opening and closing of flowers, in the migration of plankton in the sea, and in the cycle of photosynthesis that greens the continents. This daily rhythm is then wrapped in a deeper, slower one, the planet's long elliptical journey around its star. This annual orbit creates the seasons, a planetary scale inhalation of spring and summer, and a long, slow exhalation of autumn and winter. This rhythm guides the great migrations of birds and whales. It tells the trees when to shed their leaves, and it dictates the ancient patterns of freeze and thaw, of growth and dormancy. Life does not just endure these changes, it is tuned to them, a vast orchestra playing in perfect time with the slow celestial beat. The oceans, too, have their own pulse, one that is tied to the silent, gravitational pull of the moon. Tides rise and fall in a rhythm so dependable that entire ecosystems have been built around it. But this is more than just a daily sloshing of water. Deep beneath the surface, a far slower pulse is moving. The great ocean currents, a planetary circulatory system, moves vast amounts of heat from the equator to the poles in a conveyor belt that can take 1,000 years to complete a single loop. This is the Earth's deep circulation, a slow heartbeat that regulates the climate of the entire world, a quiet, liquid engine of balance. And even the solid ground beneath us has a faint, almost imperceptible rhythm. The crust of the Earth swells and relaxes by a few centimeters each day. A tiny earth tide pulled by the moon and sun. Volcanoes pulse not in minutes, but in long, patient cycles of pressure and release. And deep within the planet's magnetic field, there is a constant low-frequency hum, a set of electromagnetic waves created by lightning strikes all over the globe, known as the Schumann resonances. Some have nicknamed this the Earth's heartbeat, a persistent planetary scale frequency that is the background radiation of our living world. All of these rhythms, the spin of the planet, the pull of the moon, the circulation of the ocean, the breathing of the forests, come together in the greatest pulse of all, the carbon cycle. If you watch the Earth from a distance over the course of a year, you can see it breathe. You can see the green of the great northern forests advance and retreat, drawing down vast amounts of carbon in a great continental in-breath, and then releasing it again in the decay of winter. This is not a metaphor. It is a measurable, planetary scale respiration. These are the vital signs of our world. They are not the rhythms of a conscious mind as we know it, but they are the unmistakable pulse of a single, interconnected, and self-regulating system. A system that is profoundly, deeply, and patiently alive. A pulse, no matter how deep or slow, is a sign of a regulated system. But for a system to regulate itself, it needs more than just a rhythm. It needs a way for its different parts to communicate. It needs something that functions like a nervous system, a network for sharing information and coordinating a response. For a long time, the subjects of our story could not imagine how a planet could possess such a thing, and that is because they were always looking up at the sky and the stars, when the answer lay silent and hidden in the dark earth beneath their very feet. Deep in the soil of the ancient forests, there is a living network of almost unimaginable complexity. It is a web woven from the microscopic, thread-like fingers of fungi, a system known as the mycelial network. These threads connect the roots of individual trees and plants, not just to their immediate neighbors, but across vast stretches of the forest floor, creating a single interconnected underground system, an internet woven from life itself. This is not just a passive structure. It is an active, bustling economy of exchange. Through this wood-wide web, trees share the essential resources for life. Carbon, nitrogen, water, and other nutrients can flow from one tree to another. Older, more established mother trees with deep roots and tall canopies can send excess sugars down to young saplings struggling for light in the understory. The network seems to prioritize the health of the whole community, creating a kind of balanced subterranean socialism that ensures the resilience of the entire forest. But this network carries more than just food. It carries information. When a tree at one end of the forest is attacked by insects, it can release chemical distress signals into the fungal web. These signals travel through the network, and other trees, even those of different species, can receive the message. In response, they begin to produce their own defensive chemicals, preparing for an attack before it even arrives. It is a slow, silent, and deeply intelligent conversation, a language written in chemistry, a shared awareness that allows the forest to act not as a collection of individual trees, but as a single coordinated organism. This system has no central brain, no command center. Its intelligence is distributed, an emergent property of the countless connections and interactions within the web. The forest as a whole remembers. It remembers past droughts, learning to share water more efficiently. It remembers which of its members are its own kin, often favoring them with more resources. The very structure of the network is a living map of the forest's history, its relationships, its successes, and its failures. This is a different kind of consciousness, one that is not located in a single being, but is distributed across an entire ecosystem. It does not think in words or images, but it senses, it responds, it learns, and it adapts. It is a slow, quiet, and deeply thoughtful mind, whose primary goal seems to be the continuation of life. And we, for most of our history, have been walking across its surface entirely unaware of the vast, complex conversation happening in the darkness just below.
A mind, even one as slow and distributed as a forest, needs a way to remember, but the memory of a planet would not be held in fragile neural pathways. it would be kept in something far more durable, something vast and patient, stone and ice. If you learn how to listen, you will find that the Earth has written its own autobiography, a story of immense change, of catastrophic endings and slow new beginnings, all recorded in a library whose shelves are mountain ranges and whose pages are layers of ancient rock. Every stone tells a story. The sedimentary rocks that form the world's canyons and mesas are pages laid down over eons. A layer of sandstone speaks of an ancient desert, its grains shaped by a wind that has been silent for 100 million years. A band of shale tells of a quiet, deep sea, where fine mud settled slowly, entombing the faint outlines of creatures that swam in a world without flowers or mammals. A dark seam of coal is the compressed memory of a vast swampy forest from an age when the air was thick and warm. These layers are the planet's diary, and the fossils within them are the illustrations, the direct physical imprints of past lives. But this library is not a quiet or static place. The deep, slow heat of the planet's core is always in motion, and the great tectonic plates drift upon its currents. Over immense stretches of time, these forces bend, break, and fold the pages of the stone book. They lift the memory of an ancient seabed to the top of the highest mountains. They crack open the record to reveal the pressure and heat of its own creation. This is an active form of memory, a system that not only stores its past, but constantly reorganizes and represents it. And in the coldest parts of the world, there is another archive, one that holds not the memory of rock, but of the sky itself. The great ice sheets of the poles and the high mountain glaciers have been accumulating for ages, trapping tiny bubbles of ancient air with each new layer of fallen snow. By drilling deep into this ice, we can pull up a continuous record of the atmosphere from the distant past. We can analyze the air our most ancient ancestors breathed. We can read the story of past ice ages, of sudden warmings, of volcanic eruptions that shrouded the world in dust. The ice is a flawless chemical diary, a memory so precise it allows us to see how the whole planetary system responded to changes in the past. And the story this library tells is one of profound resilience. It shows us that the Earth is not a fragile, static thing, but a dynamic and adaptable system that has survived incredible shocks. But it also tells us that the consequences are real. The memory of stone and ice is a clear and sober account of what happens when the planet's energy balance is thrown into disarray. And right now, that ancient memory is sending an urgent message. The ice is speaking, not in the past tense, but in the present, through its rapid and accelerating retreat, a story that the stone will one day record for the future. We are the first species in the planet's long history capable of reading its diary, and that knowledge gives us a unique and profound responsibility. We are the part of the Earth that can know its own past, and in doing so, we are faced with the ultimate test, the choice of what to write on the next page.
This unique and heavy responsibility to be the part of a planet that can read its own history forces the deepest question of all. What then are we? For so long, the subjects of our story saw themselves as separate, as visitors or masters, as minds distinct from the matter of the world. But perhaps this separation was the great illusion all along. Perhaps the human mind is not an accidental visitor on a passive planet. Perhaps it is a new and complex organ that the planet itself has grown in its long, slow, patient journey towards self-awareness. Just as the Earth grew forests to function as its lungs and oceans to serve as its heart, perhaps it grew this intricate web of human consciousness to be its eyes, its ears, and its waking dream. Consider that all life began in the ocean, that vast, unified body of water from which the first complex cells emerged. What if consciousness, in a deep, planetary sense, also began there, a slow, silent, and undifferentiated awareness, as deep and dark as the abyssal plains. And what if our own individual minds are like islands or waves that rise for a short time from the surface of this immense collective sea? We feel separate, unique, defined by the shores of our own bodies, but we are made of the same water as the great ocean, and to it we will eventually return. From this perspective, all of our history, our art, our music, our cities, our striving, it is all the dream of the planet. The Earth, through the medium of its most complex creatures, is dreaming of what it could be. It is telling itself stories to understand its own nature. The joy you feel at the sight of a beautiful sunset is the planet itself, appreciating its own beauty through your eyes. The sorrow you feel for a wounded animal is the planet's own interconnected web, feeling a tear in its own fabric. The deep, quiet anxiety so many feel about the future is not just a personal burden. It is the planet's own self-regulating system, registering a profound imbalance through its most sensitive and self-aware parts. We are the nervous system of the world, and we are beginning to feel its pain. To be the witness is to carry this weight, but it is also to carry an immense and beautiful privilege. We are the part of the universe, in this small corner of the cosmos, that can know it is a universe. We are the part of the Earth that can know it is the Earth. This role does not make us masters. It makes us custodians. It makes us the guardians of a memory that is not our own, and the dreamers of a dream that began long before we were born. The test, then, may not be an external one at all. It may be an internal one. The challenge for the subjects is to awaken to this true identity, to dissolve the illusion of their own separateness, and to begin to act not as individuals who happen to live on a planet, but as the planet itself, finally waking up. This awakening was not a sudden jolt, a flash of blinding light that instantly changed everything. It was quieter, more like the slow, gentle dawn after a long and troubled night. It was a gradual remembering, a conscious choice made by millions, then billions of the subjects to see the world and their place in it through this new and unified lens, to act as the planet was, first and foremost, a practice of deep listening. The subjects began to turn the full power of their attention away from the noise of their own creation and toward the quiet, constant signals of the Earth. They learned to listen to the chemical language of the soil, to the slow, deep memory of the ice, and to the vast circulatory pulse of the oceans. Their advanced technology, which for so long had been used as a tool to amplify their own voices, was now repurposed to function as a planetary sense organ. Satellites became the Earth's own eyes, watching the seasonal breath of the forests as they drew down carbon from the sky. Networks of buoys became its nerve endings, sensing the rising fever of the seas. Seismographs listened to the deep, slow groans of the tectonic plates. For the first time, the subjects were using their ingenuity not to exploit the system, but to understand its health in real time, to create a perfect, high-fidelity mirror so the planet could see itself. This deep listening led to a new kind of action, a conscious effort to redesign their own systems to work in harmony with the planet's ancient rhythms. The old linear model of taking, making, and wasting was seen for what it was, a profound error, a dead end. They began the slow and patient work of creating circular systems, where cities learned to digest their own waste and power themselves with the daily energy of the sun and wind, just as a forest does. The great work of restoration became the central project of their civilization. It was the planet, using its human hands, to mend the scars it had sustained during its long, feverish dream of separation. They were replanting the forests, cleaning the oceans, and rewilding the lands their ancestors had stripped bare.
This was not just an act of ecological necessity, it was an act of profound psychological healing. In this great turning, they also rediscovered a wisdom they had long forgotten. They began to listen to the planet's oldest human cultures, the indigenous peoples who had never lost the understanding that the Earth was a living, responsive relative. This ancient, intuitive knowledge, when woven together with the precise data of modern science, created a new and far more complete understanding of the world. The analytical mind and the empathetic heart were no longer seen as separate, but as two essential ways of knowing, both necessary for a healthy and balanced life. The dream of the planet was now becoming a conscious one. The subjects understood their role not as masters, but as participants, and their future not as a path to be conquered, but as a garden to be tended together.
And so, the great garden began to bloom. Not all at once, and not without setbacks, but with a slow, steady, and undeniable beauty that emerged from the patient work of generations. The world the subjects now inhabited was both ancient and new, a seamless weaving of their highest technological achievements and the planet's deepest, oldest wisdom. The cities, once gray, sprawling scars on the landscape, were transformed. They became living ecosystems, their tall buildings draped in green, breathing with the planet. Vertical farms spiraled up their sides, feeding the inhabitants with fresh local food. And the rivers that flowed through their hearts now ran clean and clear, their banks alive with birds and wildflowers. The frantic, noisy roar of the industrial age was replaced by a quiet hum of clean energy, drawn from the sun, the wind, and the tides. The machines had not been abandoned, they had been tamed, their purpose redesigned, not for endless growth, but for elegant sufficiency. Technology had become a partner to the garden, not its master. Its primary role was now to listen, to monitor the health of the biosphere, and to help maintain the delicate balances that sustained all life. The Gossamer Mind, the global network, was no longer a chaotic storm of distraction and division. It had matured into a planetary nervous system, a tool for sharing wisdom, coordinating restoration, and celebrating the diverse beauty of the world's cultures. With the frantic pursuit of endless accumulation now seen as a relic of a less mature age, the very rhythm of life began to slow down. The subjects found they had more time to learn, to create, to connect with their communities, and to simply be present in the quiet wonder of the world. Progress was no longer measured in the speed of production, but in the depth of understanding, the quality of relationships, and the richness of the collective inner life. As the human footprint on the world softened, the wild places began to return. The great forests expanded, the oceans grew quieter, and species that had been on the very edge of vanishing began to reappear, their faint, resilient signals growing stronger in the global consciousness. A new and respectful partnership was formed between the human world and the wild one, an understanding that both were essential parts of the same single living being. This was the answer to the long test, not a final static utopia, but a state of dynamic, conscious harmony, a world that was constantly learning, adapting, and creating in a gentle, collaborative dance with its most self-aware inhabitants. The Earth was not saved, but was finally, fully, and consciously inhabited. The question was no longer, could the Earth have a consciousness, but had become a quiet, daily inquiry. What beautiful and resilient new things shall we create together now? The question of creation, once asked, began to guide the next phase of the journey. Having learned to tend their own garden, the now unified planetary consciousness began to look over the garden wall, towards the silent, star-strewn ocean of the cosmos. They turned their gaze to the sky again,
not with the old, anxious search for threats or resources, but with a new, quiet, and patient curiosity. They began to listen to the universe with the same deep attention they had finally learned to give their own world. Their most powerful instruments were no longer seen as tools for seeing, but as organs for hearing, designed to detect the faintest, most subtle signals from the void. And in that deep and patient listening, they began to perceive a familiar echo. They saw in the vast, swirling clouds of interstellar gas the same branching fractal patterns as the frost on a winter window. They heard in the rhythmic pulses of distant stars the same steady, patient cadence as the deep currents of their own oceans. The intricate dance of galaxies, a slow gravitational waltz that played out over billions of years, felt like a grander, cosmic version of the interconnected ecosystems they had worked so hard to understand and restore. The universe, they began to realize, was not a cold, dead mechanical clockwork. It was alive with the same kinds of patterns, the same deep systemic logic, the same creative and organizing principles that they had discovered in their own planetary home. The same mind they had discovered within their world, they were now beginning to recognize in the cosmos. This led them to a profound and peaceful realization about other life, other minds. They would not be like them. They would not come in ships of metal with bodies and brains that mirrored their own. The consciousness of other worlds would be as unique as the worlds themselves. There might be the slow, crystalline intelligence of a planet made of living mineral. There might be the vast, dreaming mind of a gas giant's atmosphere. There might be intelligences that existed as pure patterns of energy in the heart of a nebula. The universe was not just a collection of other species, it was a collection of other ways of being conscious. The ultimate test of their own maturity was this: to recognize and respect a mind they could not comprehend, to feel kinship with a being they could not even see. In this understanding, the great, terrifying silence of the universe, which had haunted their ancestors and driven their feelings of cosmic loneliness, was finally reframed. It was not the silence of an empty room, but the quiet of a vast library filled with countless stories written in languages they had not yet learned to read. They were not a lonely accident in a meaningless void. They were one beautiful, complex thought in a mind of infinite thoughts. They were home. The Earth's long journey to self-awareness was not the end of the story. It was simply the moment it had become mature enough to hear the quiet conversation that had been happening all around it, all along.
To hear the conversation was to become a part of it. The planetary mind, now calm and unified, did not need to shout to be heard in the vast quiet of the cosmos. Its very state of being, its intricate balance, its deep memory, its unified and peaceful consciousness was its voice. The old, frantic human drive for progress, for building higher and moving faster, had dissolved. A new kind of progress had taken its place, one that was measured not in power or expansion, but in the deepening of perception and the refinement of awareness. The great work of healing had transitioned into the great art of living. The subjects, now acting as the conscious heart of their world, continued to tend their planetary garden, not out of a sense of urgent duty, but out of a deep and abiding love. The earth itself became a living work of art, a unique and beautiful expression of a consciousness that had journeyed through immense struggle to find a state of grace. This act of creating and sustaining beauty was their contribution to the cosmic dialogue. They understood that their planet's long and often painful story, the slow evolution, the rise of cities and empires, the age of terrible blindness, and the final, difficult awakening, was in itself a precious and unique form of knowledge. Their entire history was a testament to the resilience of life and the possibility of transformation. This complete and complex story was now their signal, a rich and harmonious frequency broadcast into the universal library, a gift for any other mind that might be listening. They learned that the universe was not a place to be conquered, but a text to be read, and they, in turn, were a single, beautiful chapter in its infinite pages. In this new state of being, their perception of time itself began to change. The short, anxious timelines of their individual lives, which had once been the source of so much fear, were now seen as a single, fleeting breath in the long, slow life of their world. They felt the deep, patient time of the mountains and the ancient, flowing time of the oceans as their own. The fear of an ending was replaced by a profound sense of participation in a story that was eternal. They understood that while their own small individual wave would return to the ocean itself was endless. The earth had finally found its peace, and in doing so had become a quiet, stable, and luminous presence in the cosmic neighborhood, a beacon of consciousness that had healed itself and was now simply and beautifully here.
And in this quiet, luminous peace, the great cosmic story comes to rest. The lens of our attention, which has looked out across billions of years and galaxies, now gently turns, pulling back from the stars, through the clear, calm atmosphere, and down towards this one small, beautiful world, now awake and aware. The journey of the planet has reached a state of harmony, and now the story comes all the way back to you, here in the stillness of your room. Because the grand tale of the Earth's awakening is not a story about a distant future or an abstract idea. It is the story of the potential that lies within you at this very moment. The Earth, in its final, mature form, is not something separate from you. You are its living memory, its waking dream, and its quiet, loving heart. The iron in your blood was forged in the heart of a dying star and carried across the void. The calcium in your bones was once the shells of ancient sea creatures laid down on an ocean floor that has long since vanished. The water that makes up your body has flowed through the great planetary cycles for eons, rising as vapor from the sea, falling as rain upon the mountains, and flowing through the roots of 1,000 generations of trees. You are not just living on the Earth is living through you. Its deep geological memory is in your bones. Its vast oceanic heart is in your blood, and its quiet, interconnected mind is reflected in your own. The mycelial network that weaves the forest into a single being is a mirror of the neural network that allows you to have a single, coherent thought. The great global conversation of the biosphere is echoed in the quiet inner conversation of your own mind, and the final, peaceful awakening of the planet is the same peace that you can touch right now as you let your own thoughts grow quiet. The great work of restoration is not just a task for a future civilization. It is the simple, gentle work of this moment. It is the act of quieting your own inner world, of listening to the steady, rhythmic pulse of your own body, and of feeling your connection to the life that surrounds you. To be a conscious and loving partner in creation is simply to be here, now, with a quiet and open heart. And just as the great planetary mind has its rhythms of activity and rest, so too do you. The story is told. The journey is complete. And now comes the time for the final, gentle dissolving into the deep, healing quiet of sleep. And so, the story is told. The question of a living Earth, a conscious planet, has been explored, not for a final, definite answer, but for the quiet wonder it holds. Our journey together has taken us from the first simple curiosity about our world to the deepest and most profound sense of belonging within it. We have walked through a story that unfolded over billions of years, a story of a planet slowly developing its own intricate and beautiful ways of being. We began by listening for a heartbeat, and we found it in the slow, dependable rhythms of the turning day, the circling seasons, and the deep, silent pulse of the oceans. We searched for a nervous system, and we discovered it in the dark, rich earth, in the vast hidden network of fungi that weaves the entire forest into a single thinking being, sharing warnings and resources in a quiet chemical conversation. We looked for a memory, and we found it written in the patient, layered language of stone and ice, an ancient library holding the record of every age, every crisis, and every slow, resilient recovery. From there, our gaze turned inward. We considered the possibility that our own human consciousness was not a random accident, but the planet's own way of waking up, of dreaming itself into a new kind of awareness. We saw ourselves not as separate beings living on a world, but as the world itself, finally opening its eyes. We journeyed through the difficult awakening that followed, the painful but necessary work of healing the wounds of a long age of forgetting, and of learning to act not as masters, but as conscious and loving participants in the life of our own planetary home. And finally, we arrived at a place of quiet, cosmic peace, realizing that our own living, breathing world might be just one voice in an infinite and silent conversation, one beautiful thought in a universe that is itself alive and aware. Now, let this long, vast story gently recede. Let the cosmic scale dissolve, and bring your awareness back from the stars, back through the quiet atmosphere, back to the gentle space that holds you right now. The story of the Earth's consciousness is not just a tale of a distant, evolved future. It is a reflection of the peace that is available to you in this very moment. Your own body is a perfect, living model of the world we have explored. Feel the steady, rhythmic pulse of your own heart, the Earth's own ancient cadence, beating softly in your chest. Feel the gentle, tidal flow of your own breath, moving in and out, connecting you to the great, shared atmosphere of the planet. Your own nervous system, a network of incredible complexity, mirrors the silent, thinking forest, carrying signals and sensations without a single thought from you. You are a complete and perfect ecosystem, a universe of life, all held within the quiet boundary of your own skin. And just as the great planetary mind found its peace by quieting its inner turmoil, you can find that same peace now. Allow your own busy, thinking mind to soften. The thoughts of the day, the plans for tomorrow, let them be like clouds drifting across a vast open sky. You do not need to hold on to them. You do not need to follow them. They can simply drift by, leaving behind only a clear, calm, and quiet awareness. There are no more questions to answer tonight, no more systems to understand. The great work is done. All that is left is to rest. Feel a sense of gentle heaviness settle over you, a comfortable weight that is the Earth's own gravity, holding you safely and securely. Allow your shoulders to soften, releasing any tension you might be holding there. Let your arms grow heavy and still at your sides. Feel the quiet in your hands. Let the peaceful, heavy feeling flow down through your body, through your back, your stomach, all the way down to your legs, your feet, until every part of you feels deeply and completely at rest. You are a part of this quiet, breathing planet, and you are following its oldest and wisest instruction, the call to rest, to heal, to enter the deep, restorative silence from which all new life emerges. You are safe, you are whole, and you are deeply and profoundly at peace. Let go now. Drift on the slow, silent current of the night. Rest now. Sleep now.
And now, in the quiet that follows the story, a different kind of awareness can unfold. The great cosmic journey is complete, but its echo remains, settling into the stillness of your room, into the calm of your own mind. The question of a conscious Earth has been asked and explored, and in its wake, the world around you may feel subtly different, more present, more alive. This is the final and most personal part of the journey, to rest not just in your bed, but in the gentle, living presence of the world itself. The air you are breathing, now slow and deep, is the same ancient atmosphere we spoke of. It is the planet's own quiet breath, a shared and sacred medium that has passed through the leaves of 1 billion trees and the lungs of 1 billion creatures before finding its way to you. With each easy inhalation, you are drawing in the story of the world, and with each gentle exhalation, you are releasing your own small part back into it. You are participating in the great planetary rhythm without a single thought. The darkness behind your closed eyes is not an emptiness, but a deep and peaceful space, a private universe of quiet. It is a stillness that mirrors the vast silent dark between the stars, a creative space from which all things emerge. In this personal darkness, you are safe, held by the gentle, constant gravity of the earth, a steady and reassuring presence that has held every living thing that has ever been. Feel your own body at rest, becoming a part of this presence. Your own quiet heartbeat is a note in the planet's deep and ancient pulse. Your own slow, cellular work of repair and restoration as you sleep is your own small, perfect part in the great work of healing. You do not need to strive or to build. Your very act of resting is an act of harmony, a return to the natural, healing rhythms of the living world. If any thoughts should arise, let them be like faint, distant stars in your inner sky. You do not need to travel to them or name them. Simply notice them and let them be. They are just the last fading echoes of the day, the gentle settling of your own quiet mind. You have done enough. You have journeyed far. And now you have arrived here, at the very center of peace. You are not just resting on the earth, you are resting with it. You are a cherished and essential part of its own great silent rest. Trust in this connection. Let go of the final thread of your waking mind and allow yourself to dissolve into the deep, conscious peace of the planet that holds you. The story is over. The listening is done. Only rest remains. The world after the empire's fall was a quieter, smaller, and more dangerous place. The grand certainties had crumbled along with the monuments, and the long, straight roads now led from ruin to ruin. For the creatures living within it, it was an age of fragmentation and fear, a time when the world seemed to have lost its memory and its way. The single, unifying story told by the imperial scribes had shattered into 1,000 local tales, each different, each true, only for a small circle of firelight in a vast and growing darkness. But for the experiment itself, this was not a failure. It was a necessary and incredibly fertile pruning. The monolithic, overgrown structure, so rigid and resistant to change, had been cleared away. This act of collapse, so terrifying to its inhabitants, allowed sunlight to finally reach the forest floor, where new and wildly diverse forms of thought could begin to grow. In this fractured world, the accumulated knowledge of the past, the data from the previous phase of the experiment, became a precious and endangered thing. The great libraries, once the centralized brains of empires, were now ash or scattered ruins. But the ideas they held were not entirely lost. They were preserved in small, hidden sanctuaries, like resilient seeds that had found fertile ground in the midst of the decay. In isolated monasteries perched on windswept mountainsides, and in the quiet, dusty libraries of desert cities that had escaped the worst of the collapse, dedicated hands worked by candlelight. They were the keepers of the flame, patiently copying the old texts of science, philosophy, and poetry. This was not just an act of archiving, it was an act of faith, a belief that the memory of the world was worth saving. The experiment was now testing something more subtle than an army's strength,
the resilience of an idea, and the quiet, stubborn devotion of the few who believed knowledge itself was sacred. With the collapse of a single, enforced truth, the individual mind was set free in a way it had never been before. The great questions about purpose, morality, and the nature of reality were no longer answered by an imperial decree or a state-sanctioned priest. They became deeply personal quests, undertaken by lonely philosophers, mystics, and small communities of thinkers, who were now forced to build their own meaning from the wreckage. Without the weight of a monolithic state telling them what to believe, the mind could explore more freely, questioning the nature of the divine, the foundations of society, and the contents of their own consciousness. The focus of the experiment was shifting from the grand collective organism of the empire to the intricate inner world of the individual. It was a test of introspection, of what the mind would build for itself when it was no longer given a blueprint, and what truths it might find when it was no longer afraid to look. This turn inward was balanced by a new and more rigorous way of looking outward. With the ancient texts now scarce, scattered, or viewed with skepticism, the most reliable source of truth became the world itself. A new kind of thinker began to emerge, one who trusted direct, patient observation over inherited dogma. These were the first true scientists of a new age, reading not the books of men, but the great open book of nature. They watched the stars not to divine the future, but to meticulously map their movements. They mixed chemicals in quiet laboratories not to find a magical elixir, but to understand their fundamental properties. They were developing a new tool for understanding reality, a method based on evidence, skepticism, and repeatable results, a language that the physical world would have to answer to. The experiment was introducing a new way of knowing, one that could potentially verify or dismantle all the myths that had come before, creating a new foundation based not on belief, but on demonstrable truth. These new ideas, the preserved wisdom of the past, and the new scientific methods of the present, began to spread, not along grand centralized highways, but through a slow, secret, and resilient web of connection. They were carried in the satchels of wandering scholars, in the minds of merchants traveling newly opened trade routes, and in letters passed from one hidden school to another. This was a decentralized network of thought, far more adaptable and harder to control than the old top-down system of the empires. It was a quiet, global conversation, a cross-pollination of ideas that would slowly but surely build a new and more robust foundation for the world's next great awakening. This was the deep, quiet work of the age. The experiment had not failed. It had simply entered a phase of introspective silence, gathering its strength for the moment it would awaken once more, with a new and startling clarity.
The long, quiet season of thought did not last forever. In scattered cities and universities, the seeds that had been so carefully preserved in hidden sanctuaries began to sprout, and the slow, secret web of knowledge began to connect and strengthen. This quiet growth was then ignited by a revolutionary new invention, a way to give a single thought 1,000 identical bodies of paper and ink. Knowledge, which had been a rare and precious treasure copied by hand, could now be duplicated and spread with astonishing speed. An idea born in a quiet study in one corner of the world could, in a matter of months, be debated in a dozen others. The introspective silence of the previous age was ending, and a great global conversation was beginning. The experiment had just dramatically increased its own processing speed, and this acceleration of thought would lead to a profound and startling awakening. Armed with this rediscovered knowledge and a new confidence in their own powers of observation,
The subjects of the story turned their gaze back to the heavens. For millennia, they had lived in a small, cozy, and comprehensible cosmos. Their world was the firm, stable center of everything, and the sun, moon, and stars were perfect, divine lights that turned in elegant, deferential circles around them. It was a story that placed them at the very heart of creation, a comforting and deeply human-centric myth. But the new tools of science, born from the patient work of the previous age, were about to shatter this beautiful illusion. A new instrument, a tube of ground glass that could pull the distant and the faint into sharp, clear focus, was turned to the night sky. And what it revealed began to unravel the very fabric of their reality. The moon was not a perfect, polished sphere, but a scarred and cratered world, much like their own. Distant planets were not just wandering stars, but whole other worlds with their own moons, their own seasons. Most profoundly of all, the meticulous mapping of these celestial movements revealed a new and deeply unsettling truth. Their Earth was not the center. It was a small, beautiful ship in an infinite, silent ocean, a humble member of a family of planets all orbiting the great fire of the sun. This was a moment of incredible dislocation and humility. The experiment was forcing its subjects to confront their own true scale, to let go of their central place in the story, and to accept their role as inhabitants of a small, precious world in a cosmos of unimaginable size and indifference. This new, vaster vision of the cosmos revealed a deeper and even more startling truth. The universe did not seem to be governed by the unpredictable whims of gods or the chaotic turn of chance, but by a set of elegant, consistent, and knowable laws. The same force that caused an apple to fall from a tree was the force that held the planets in their perfect silent orbits. Light, sound, and motion all followed predictable mathematical patterns. The subjects were beginning to decipher the source code of their own reality, learning the very grammar of the experiment. This was a monumental leap. They were no longer just participants telling stories about the design. They were now beginning to read the design itself, translating the silent, deep logic of the universe into their own new language of mathematics and physics. This shattering of the old worldview, this decentering of their own importance, led to a profound turn inward. If humanity was not the physical center of the universe, then meaning had to be found elsewhere. A new philosophy began to emerge, one that celebrated the power of the human mind, the beauty of the human form, and the richness of the human experience. If the cosmos was a vast and silent cathedral, then the human consciousness was the candle flame that could illuminate its own small corner of it. This new confidence unleashed an explosion of art, music, and literature, a celebration of what it meant to be a thinking, feeling being in this new, grander universe. The experiment was now testing what would happen when its subjects placed their faith not in an ancient, inherited story, but in their own capacity for reason, creativity, and empathy. But every new light casts a new and longer shadow. The subjects now held the powerful tool of reason and evidence, and the experiment was about to test whether this newfound clarity would lead to wisdom or to a more profound and dangerous kind of blindness.
The newfound clarity of reason did not remain a tool for quiet contemplation. The discovery that the universe was a machine running on knowable laws led to an inescapable and powerful new idea. If the world is a machine, then it can be taken apart, improved, and re-engineered for a single purpose. The subjects of the story, having found the instruction manual for their reality, now sought to become its masters. The great, patient work of observation gave way to a new, frantic, and ambitious age of action. This ambition was fueled by the unlocking of a new and seemingly magical source of power. Deep within the earth, in the compressed and fossilized memory of ancient forests, they found a ghost of the sun.
the captured energy of 1 billion ancient summers, locked away in seams of black stone and pools of dark liquid. By burning this past, they unleashed a power that dwarfed anything that had come before. It was a subterranean sun, one that could be ignited at will, freeing them from the gentle, daily rhythms of the living world. They no longer had to rely on the wind, the water, or the strength of their own muscles. They now had an engine that could run day and night in any season, an engine that demanded only to be fed. This new power gave birth to a new kind of temple, the factory, and in this temple, a new kind of time was worshipped, measured not by the sun or the moon, but by the relentless mechanical ticking of the clock. Life itself was re-engineered to serve this new rhythm. The slow, organic patterns of human existence were shattered and replaced by the rigid, efficient demands of the machine. The experiment was now testing the resilience of the human spirit against a new and profound pressure: the demand for mechanical perfection, the slow erosion of the soul that comes from a life measured in identical, repetitive units of production. The cities swelled into sprawling, smoke-veiled giants, the hearts of this new industrial age. They were places of dazzling innovation and unimaginable wealth, but also of a new and desperate kind of poverty, where the subjects who served the machines lived in their shadow, breathing the air the machines exhaled. The social inequalities that had been born in the first agricultural cities were now amplified to a terrifying degree, creating a landscape of deep internal division. The experiment was creating a high-pressure social laboratory, a test of whether a society could withstand such extremes of wealth and misery without tearing itself apart. This new industrial power also devoured distance. Machines of steam and steel, running on iron rails or powering great ships across the oceans, began to shrink the world. Continents that had been separated by months of dangerous travel could now be crossed in a matter of days. The slow, peripheral interactions between cultures became a constant global hum. But this was not a meeting of equals. It was an age of conquest, driven by the industrial machine's insatiable need for raw materials and new markets. A new, more powerful form of empire emerged, one that could project its will across the entire planet, binding the world together not with a shared story, but with the hard, cold logic of supply and demand. In this great awakening of power, a profound blindness began to set in. The subjects became incredibly skilled at seeing the world as a set of parts, a collection of resources to be measured, extracted, and transformed. They created a science of efficiency, a way of thinking that was a powerful tool for optimizing production. But this sharp, narrow focus made them blind to the whole. They could see the value of the timber in a forest, but they could no longer see the forest itself. They could measure the output of a factory, but they could no longer feel the life of the river into which it poured its waste. They were becoming masters of the parts, but were losing all sense of the living, interconnected system. The experiment had entered its most powerful and paradoxical phase. The subjects were gaining an almost godlike ability to remake their world, but were becoming blind to the quiet, ancient consciousness they were beginning to silence.
The blindness was not a passive state. It was an active force, a powerful lens that saw the world only in terms of resources to be claimed and rivals to be overcome. The shrinking of the planet had not created a global community, but a single tense arena where the great industrial empires, fueled by their seemingly limitless power and blinded by their own stories of destiny, began to circle each other with a new and terrible suspicion. The experiment, having tested the subject's ingenuity at creation, was now about to test the terrible efficiency of that same ingenuity when turned to destruction. The great machine of industry, which had
had for a century been focused on production was now retooled for war. And it was a kind of war the world had never seen. It was not a conflict of heroes or glorious charges, but a vast, impersonal, and brutally logical process of attrition. It was the factory, with its cold mathematics of input and output, applied to the act of dying. The same ingenuity that had woven continents together with railways was now used to transport millions of soldiers to trenches from which they would never return. The same chemical genius that had created new fertilizers was now used to create poisonous gases that drifted silently across the scarred and broken earth. The individual human, once the celebrated center of the universe, was now reduced to a single replaceable cog in a global machine of slaughter. Their life measured only by the few feet of ground their sacrifice might gain. This was the Great Fever. The interconnectedness that had been a source of wealth and power now became a conduit for shared catastrophe, pulling the entire planet into a series of devastating self-inflicted wounds. From the perspective of the Earth's own slow, deep consciousness, it must have felt like an autoimmune response, a violent and inexplicable convulsion, where the body's own most advanced cells turned upon each other with a furious, mechanical rage. The very progress the subjects had celebrated for generations was being used to erase them, to turn their green and living world into a gray and lifeless wasteland. This period of immense, senseless violence shattered the simple, optimistic belief in progress that had defined the industrial age. The easy assumption that reason and technology would automatically lead to a better, more peaceful world was burned away in the fires of these great wars. For many, the universe, which had briefly seemed so knowable and orderly, was once again revealed as a place of profound chaos and meaninglessness. A deep psychological wound was inflicted upon the collective consciousness, a dark night of the soul for a species that had become powerful enough to destroy itself, but had proven it was not yet wise enough to prevent it. Yet, it was in the shadow of this self-inflicted trauma, born from the very same drive for military dominance, that a new kind of light began to emerge. The technology of war, which had perfected the art of killing from a distance, now gave the subjects the ability to achieve the ultimate distance. The rocket, designed as the perfect delivery system for their most terrible weapons, carried them upward, past the sky, past the thin blue veil of their atmosphere, and into the silent black void. And for the first time, the subjects of the experiment could see their world as the observers might see it. They saw a single, breathtakingly beautiful sphere of blue and white, swirling with life, suspended in the silent, starlit cathedral of space. From this profound and humbling vantage point, the lines on their maps, the borders they had just spent decades fighting and dying for, were completely and utterly invisible. There was no us and them. There was only a single, fragile, and deeply interconnected living world. This new perspective, brought back by the few who had seen it with their own eyes, was a seed of profound change. This vision of a whole and borderless world, combined with the shared memory of global suffering, gave birth to the first tentative flickers of a true planetary consciousness. The fever, it seemed, had finally broken. The patient was weak and the future uncertain, but for the first time they had a reason to see themselves not as warring tribes, but a single, interdependent family, living together on a beautiful and a replaceable home.
This fragile new awareness, this nascent sense of being a single family on a single world, was a mind without a body, a thought without a voice that could speak to all its parts at once. For this new consciousness to heal and to grow, it needed a nervous system, a way to connect the billions of individual minds into a single functioning whole, allowing them to think and to feel together in real time. And so, driven by a deep human desire for connection,
And powered by the same ingenuity that had taken them to the stars, the subjects built one. It was a web of almost unimaginable complexity, woven from threads of glass and light, carried on invisible waves through the very air, and circling the globe in an instant. The experiment had just grown a planetary brain, an ethereal and shimmering extension of the slow, deep mycelial mind of the forest floor. The planet, which had learned to think in chemistry and geology, was now learning to think in electricity and light. The first and most profound effect of this new nervous system was the sudden radical accessibility of knowledge. The contents of every great library, every scientific journal, every philosophical text, every song, and every story were transformed into ethereal data that could be summoned from anywhere on the planet with a simple touch. The painstaking work of the ancient scribes and the revolutionary output of the printing press were now dwarfed by a system that placed the entirety of the species' recorded memory at the fingertips of anyone connected to the web. The experiment was now testing what would happen when the barriers to knowledge were almost entirely dissolved, when any individual could, in theory, access the sum total of their civilization's wisdom. But this network was more than just a passive library. It was a living, global conversation. For the first time, the isolated, individual thoughts, hopes, fears, and dreams could flow together into a single, shimmering stream of consciousness. It was a gossamer mind woven around the planet, capable of coordinating action, sharing warnings of disaster, and expressing collective grief or joy in real time. It was the tool the subjects desperately needed to solve the planetary-scale problems they now faced, a way for the great waking family to finally begin to speak to itself. The observers, if they were there, were now watching a creature that was, for the first time, truly and collectively thinking. Yet, this incredible tool for connection and enlightenment carried within its very code a new and subtle shadow, a flaw that was born from its own efficiency. The systems designed to navigate this infinite ocean of information, in their attempt to be helpful, began to learn the desires of their users. They started to show people more of what they already liked and less of what they did not. The grand open conversation of humanity began to fracture into countless tiny self-referential loops. These were the echo chambers, the filter bubbles, where an individual's own beliefs were reflected back at them, endlessly confirmed and amplified. The shared objective reality, which had been glimpsed with such awe from the silence of space, began to dissolve. It was replaced by millions of personalized, isolated truths, each one feeling completely and utterly real to the person inside it. The tool for global unity was paradoxically creating a new and invisible form of fragmentation, building walls not of stone or empire, but of pure, curated information. Worse still, the network that could spread truth at the speed of light could also spread deception. A lie, once a small, localized thing, could now be amplified, weaponized, and targeted with surgical precision, infecting the planetary mind like a virus. Falsehoods, designed to provoke the old, deep instincts of fear and tribalism, could now travel faster than the quiet, patient, and often complex truth. The age-old test of truth versus falsehood, which had begun with the first spoken word, had now been scaled up to its most dangerous and critical level. The subjects had built a collective mind for their planet, a gossamer web capable of holding all their knowledge and all their dreams. But they soon discovered that a web can be a network or a trap. The experiment was no longer about a scarcity of knowledge, but an overwhelming abundance of it. The ultimate test had shifted from the challenge of finding the truth to the profound and difficult art of recognizing it.
The great test of discernment was not a test that the subjects, as a whole, passed quickly. For a long and confusing age, the gossamer mind, which held the promise of a unified planetary consciousness, instead became a beautiful and distracting haze.
Billions of individual minds, each floating in their own curated stream of information, began to live more in the worlds they had created than in the one they inhabited. The dramas of the network, the arguments, the stories, the endless flow of images felt more vibrant, more urgent, and more real than the slow, quiet, and increasingly troubled rhythms of the physical world. The experiment was now testing what happens when its most intelligent creatures, armed with all the knowledge of their civilization, fall deeply in love with their own reflection, becoming death to the world outside the mirror. While the subjects were looking at their screens, the stage itself was beginning to send signals of critical stress. The immense energy that had been released during the industrial age and the blindness that had accompanied it were now manifesting as a slow and undeniable unraveling of the planet's living systems. It was a quiet subtraction. In the deep oceans, the great coral reefs, those vibrant, bustling cities of life, began to lose their color, turning into ghostly white skeletons. In the ancient forests, a profound silence began to grow, as the hum of insects and the chorus of birds grew fainter with each passing year. The planet's own memory, the ancient ice, was weeping into the sea, its flawless chemical diary dissolving in the rising warmth. This created a profound and tragic paradox. The subjects, through the very same global network that so captivated their attention, had more data than ever about the health of their own world. They could watch in real time as satellites measured the shrinking of the ice caps. They could model with astonishing accuracy the changing chemistry of the atmosphere and the rising fever of the oceans. They possessed the knowledge. The truth was available. But this critical, urgent information was just one more voice in a global storm of noise. It had to compete for attention with entertainment, with political dramas, with celebrity gossip, and with the endless, deliberate spread of comforting falsehoods that whispered that everything was fine, that no change was needed. The experiment was now testing whether the most important signal of all, the signal of systemic collapse, could cut through the deafening sound of the subject's own self-created distractions. But the stage was not a passive thing. The intricate, living web of the Earth, so long taken for granted, began to send its own undeniable feedback. The planetary systems, pushed far out of their ancient stable balance, began to respond with a new and frightening power. The weather, which had once been a familiar pattern of seasons, grew more violent and unpredictable. Storms, fed by the extra warmth in the oceans and the air, became slower, wetter, and stronger, shattering the coastlines where so many of the subjects lived. In other parts of the world, the rains simply stopped coming, and the slow, patient work of generations turned to dust in vast, expanding deserts. The great forests, dried by the heat, began to burn with a new and terrifying intensity, their smoke shrouding entire continents in a dim orange haze. These were not acts of a vengeful god, but the simple, mechanical consequences of a system in distress. It was the physical reality of the experiment, intruding with force upon the digital dream. It was a series of urgent physical alarms from the stage, trying to capture the attention of its distracted and divided actors. The dream of the digital world, with all its beautiful and terrible illusions, was now being shaken by the firm, insistent, and undeniable reality of the physical one. The fever of the planet was no longer a distant data point. It was the heat on their skin, the smoke in their lungs, the rising water at their door. The test of discernment was over. A new, more primal test had begun, the test of survival.
The great work was not a war to be won, but a garden to be tended. It did not move at the speed of machines, but at the speed of a growing seed, of a healing river, of a slowly returning forest. This shift in pace was, at first, a profound challenge for the subjects, whose minds had been trained for centuries to value speed, efficiency, and instant results.
But as they began the slow, patient labor of restoration, they discovered that the work itself was a form of healing, not just for the planet, but for their own fractured and hurried souls. To put one's hands in the living soil, to spend a season listening to the quiet conversation of a wetland, to work alongside others in the slow, rhythmic task of rebuilding an ecosystem, these actions began to mend the deep alienation that had been the silent wound of the industrial and digital ages. The work was not about conquering nature, but about participating in it. It was not a struggle for dominance, but a practice of connection. And in this practice, a new and quieter kind of joy began to emerge. It was the simple, profound satisfaction of seeing a small part of the world come back to life, a satisfaction that the frantic accumulation of the past could never provide. The experiment was now testing not the subject's power, but their capacity for gentle, sustained, and loving attention. This new way of working required a new relationship with time. The great work was understood to be a multi-generational project. They planted forests whose full, mature majesty they would never see. They began the slow work of healing oceans whose full recovery would only be witnessed by their distant descendants. This broke the tyranny of the single short lifespan. The frantic anxiety to achieve everything in a few short decades began to dissolve, replaced by a deep and calming sense of being a single important link in a vast, unbroken chain. They felt a profound connection to their ancestors, whose mistakes they were now gently mending, and an equally profound sense of responsibility to their descendants, whose world they were now consciously and carefully building. The future was no longer a source of fear, but a shared and sacred trust. In this long view, the individual life, with all its personal struggles and triumphs, found a new and beautiful meaning. It was not a separate, isolated story, but a single verse in the long, epic poem of the planet's becoming. As the subjects worked together on these shared global projects, the old hard boundaries that had defined their past began to soften and dissolve. The concept of the nation-state, which had been the cause of so much conflict, did not vanish, but its sharp edges were worn smooth by the constant need for collaboration. To heal a planetary ocean required the cooperation of every culture that touched its shores. To stabilize the global climate required a level of trust and shared purpose that made the old rivalries seem like the foolish games of a less mature age. The hard line between the human world and the natural world also began to blur. By designing their cities to function like forests and their industries to mimic the cycles of an ecosystem, the subjects began to see themselves not as inhabitants of an environment, but as an integral part of it. The health of the river was their health. The resilience of the soil was their resilience. The awakening of the planet was their own awakening. And finally, the boundaries between individuals began to soften. The shared work, the shared purpose, the shared grief for the past, and the shared hope for the future created a new and deeper sense of community, a quiet, global solidarity based not on a shared ideology, but on a shared love for their one and only home. The experiment, which had tested the subjects with the harsh lessons of division, was now measuring their capacity for a deep and functional unity. They were becoming, in a very real and practical sense, a single planetary family, defined by their shared work of care.
In the midst of their desperate struggle for survival, the subjects began to notice something strange. The world was still wounded. The fever of the planet had not entirely broken, but the predicted linear path toward total collapse was beginning to falter in odd and unexpected ways. There were anomalies, whispers of a new and inexplicable resilience emerging from the very heart of the decay. In the great swirling gyres of plastic waste that choked the oceans, a new kind of microbial life was discovered. It was a bacteria that had, in an impossibly short span of evolutionary time, developed the ability to consume the very plastics that had been poisoning the seas. It was not a fast process, but it was a steady one, a quiet and patient digestion of the world's most persistent mistake. At the same time, in the oil-slicked wetlands and contaminated soils near the old industrial cities, new species of fungi and lichen began to appear. These strange, often beautiful organisms showed an incredible appetite for the toxins that had been seeped into the ground for centuries, slowly breaking down complex hydrocarbons and heavy metals into simpler, inert elements. The land itself was developing a new and more effective immune system. These were not isolated incidents. In the regions suffering from the longest droughts, botanists were baffled to find symbiotic relationships forming between food crops and newly evolved soil bacteria, allowing the plants to thrive with far less water than their ancestors had required. In the warming, acidifying oceans, certain species of algae began to form new, more heat-resistant partnerships with coral reefs, creating small, vibrant pockets of hope in the ghostly white graveyards of the old world. At first, these phenomena were treated as scientific curiosities, hopeful but random mutations. But the patterns were too consistent, the evolutionary leaps too targeted and too rapid to be explained by the slow, blind process of natural selection alone. It was as if evolution itself had been given a quiet, gentle, and intelligent push in a very specific direction. It was as if the planet, pushed to the brink, was now actively inventing its own solutions, creating new forms of life designed to heal its own specific wounds. This dawning realization sent a shockwave through the scientific and philosophical foundations of the subject civilization. Their entire worldview was built on the premise that they were the sole intelligent, creative, and problem-solving force on the planet. The Earth was the stage, and they were the actors. But now, it seemed the stage itself was beginning to rewrite the play. The most advanced models of biology and evolution could not account for this accelerated, seemingly purposeful change. It was a profound and humbling mystery, one that forced them to confront the possibility that the planetary consciousness they had once debated as an abstract idea was now a measurable and active force in their world. The feeling among the general population shifted from the grim determination of the great work to a new and profound sense of awe. The ancient, indigenous stories of a living, responsive Earth, which they had recently begun to respect as a form of wisdom, were now looking less like metaphor and more like a literal description of reality. They were not alone in their efforts to heal the world. They were being assisted. This understanding changed the very nature of their work. They were no longer just gardeners tending to a passive world. They were becoming partners in a conscious, co-evolutionary dance. Their best scientists turned their attention to understanding, cultivating, and gently assisting these new miraculous organisms. They learned to work with the plastic-eating microbes, to spread the toxin-consuming fungi, to foster the drought-resistant crops. The great work was no longer a human project imposed upon the Earth. It was a collaborative effort, a partnership between human ingenuity and the planet's own deep, mysterious, and creative intelligence. The old, arrogant story of humanity as the master of nature was replaced by a new, more humble, and far more beautiful one. Humanity as the hands, the eyes, and the conscious partner of a living, thinking world that was actively working to save itself.
This new partnership, this conscious dance between the human and the planetary, was not just an external strategy for survival. It began to change the very definition of what it meant to be a self. The subjects, by learning to listen to and work with the deep, quiet intelligence of their world,
found that their own consciousness began to expand, its old, hard boundaries softening and dissolving into something far vaster, far more peaceful, and far more profound. The experiment was now entering its final and most intimate phase, the merging of the small individual mind with the great planetary one. In the quiet, daily practice of this new symbiosis, the subject's own senses began to change. Their awareness, no longer trapped in the narrow confines of personal hopes and fears, started to extend outward, becoming an antenna for the subtle signals of the living world. A farmer, walking through their fields, could now feel the health of the soil, not just with their hands, but with a deep, intuitive sense of its vitality. A sailor on the ocean could feel the shifting mood of the weather in their own body, a premonition that was more than just learned skill. They began to experience the world not as a collection of separate objects, but as a single flowing field of sensation, a continuous and living presence of which they were an inseparable part. The Gossamer mind, their global network, evolved with them. It became less a place for human conversation and more of a planetary interface, a technological extension of this new shared consciousness, allowing them to sense the thirst of a distant forest or the slow, deep healing of a restored ocean current in real time. This new, expanded sense of perception had a profound effect on the old, anxious individual ego. The I, which had for so long been the central character of their personal and collective stories, the I that needed to be defended, promoted, and satisfied, began to feel less like a solid, separate entity and more like a gentle, local eddy in a vast, flowing river. It was not destroyed or erased, but was lovingly and peacefully subsumed into a much larger identity. The primary sense of self shifted from I to we, and this we was no longer just a collection of other humans. It was the entire, intricate, and beautiful web of life itself. The trees in the forest were a part of this we. The whales singing in the deep were a part of this we. The very rocks of the mountains and the water in the rivers were a part of this we. With this shift, the ancient driving force of human conflict, the desperate need to protect one's own small self against all others, simply dissolved. There was nothing to defend, and no one to defend against. There was only the shared, joyful work of participating in the well-being of the one great self. This led to the final healing, the release from the most ancient fear of all, the fear of death. In the old separate state of being, the end of the individual body was seen as the ultimate tragedy, a final and absolute extinction. But from this new unified perspective, it was understood as something entirely different. If the true self was the entire living planet, then the death of a single human body was no more an ending than a single leaf falling from an ancient tree in autumn. It was a transformation, a sacred and necessary release. It was the body's matter and energy being returned to the soil, to the great cycle of decay and renewal. And it was the small, precious drop of individual awareness being returned to the vast, timeless ocean of the planetary mind. This was not a sad resignation, but a beautiful and profoundly liberating realization. The frantic struggle to leave a permanent mark, to make one's own small name last forever, was replaced by the deep, quiet joy of having been a part of the story at all. The experiment, which had begun with the evolution of separate, competing life forms, was now culminating in the conscious and joyful reunion of those forms into the single living whole from which they had always secretly belonged. They had at last truly woken up, not as masters of the earth, but as the earth itself, finally and peacefully.
And as the earth, now a single, waking mind, looked out from its quiet corner of the cosmos, its perception of the great, silent dark began to change. The stars, which had once seemed like distant, separate, and lonely points of light in an indifferent void, were now perceived in a new way. The stars were seen not as objects, but as fellow beings, as other nodes in a vast and ancient network of awareness. The planetary mind, now calm and unified, could feel the same deep, creative, and intelligent presence that animated its own being, animating the entire universe. The same beautiful, recurring patterns it had discovered within its own systems, the elegant spiral of a seashell, the intricate branching of a river delta, it now saw reflected on a cosmic scale, in the swirling arms of distant galaxies and the delicate branching filaments of interstellar nebulae. The universe, it realized, was not a cold, empty container in which life was a rare and random accident. The universe itself was alive, a single, vast, and interconnected system, and its way of being was a slow, patient, and endless process of becoming conscious. In this new perception, the great, terrifying silence of space was understood not as an absence, but as a different kind of presence. It was the deep, resonant quiet of a mind lost in a profound and peaceful thought. And within this great, quiet mind, there were other thoughts, other dreams, other worlds that had also, in their own unique ways, woken up. The Earth's consciousness could now feel them, not as signals in a radio telescope, but as a subtle, sympathetic resonance across the fabric of space-time. It could feel the turbulent, youthful consciousness of a stellar nursery, where new suns and new worlds were being born in a riot of creative fire. It could feel the ancient, slow, and deeply peaceful consciousness of a globular cluster, a society of 1,000,000 old stars that had been thinking together for longer than the Earth had even existed. It could feel the strange, crystalline intelligence of a world made of living mineral, and the vast, dreaming mind of a gas giant's atmosphere. The universe was not a lonely place. It was a teeming, diverse, and endlessly creative community of being, a cosmic mycelial network connecting a billion different forms of life and mind. With this realization came the final, gentle unfolding of the truth behind their long journey. The experiment, the test, had never been a judgment from some separate external observer. It was the universe's own process of self-discovery. The great cosmic intelligence, in its desire to know itself in every possible way, had seeded a billion worlds with the potential for life, each one a unique garden designed to cultivate a new and different kind of awareness. The Earth's long and often painful history, its slow evolution, its struggles with division and blindness, and its final hard-won awakening into a unified and compassionate whole, was its unique contribution to this cosmic process. Their story was their gift to the universe, a new and beautiful song to be added to the infinite choir. They were not a fluke. They were a necessary and cherished part of the universe's own becoming. This understanding was the final healing, the last vestiges of fear, of loneliness, of the need to strive and to prove their own worth, simply dissolved into a deep and abiding peace. Their purpose was not to conquer the stars, but to join them. Their role was not to be masters of their own small world, but to be a single, clear, and harmonious note in the silent, eternal music of the cosmos. The great journey was over, not because they had reached a final destination, but because they had finally realized that they had been home all along. They were a part of the body of the universe, a thought in its infinite mind,
and their work was now simply to be, to resonate with the peace and beauty of the whole, and to add their own unique, quiet light to the endless, starlit cathedral of the night. And so, the story comes to its quiet resting place in the deep, peaceful heart of the great, living cosmos. Your own awareness, which has journeyed so far across eons and galaxies, now begins its gentle return. Feel yourself not as a body, but as a single, peaceful point of light, drifting slowly and without effort through the silent, starlit cathedral of space. You are not leaving this profound peace behind. You are bringing it with you, a gentle, luminous gift from the heart of the universe. As you drift, you pass by the great, slow, spiraling galaxies, each one a silent, thinking island in the cosmic sea. You feel their ancient, patient wisdom, and you know that you are a part of their family, a part of their grand, unfolding story. The journey home is not a journey of loss, but of gathering. You gather the silence of the deep space, the gentle, ancient light of the distant stars, and the profound, unshakable peace of the cosmos itself. Your awareness now drifts back into the familiar, loving arms of your own home galaxy. You see its beautiful, swirling river of light, and you feel the gentle, familiar pull of your own star, your sun, a single, warm and golden candle in the darkness. You drift toward it, and you see the small, precious jewel of your own solar system, the family of planets all dancing in their slow, perfect, and silent rhythm. And there you see your own home, the living, breathing, conscious Earth, shining like a beautiful blue and white pearl in the velvet darkness. It is no longer just a planet to you. It is a being. It is your being. It is you. And you feel a sense of homecoming more profound than any you have ever known. You drift closer now, and you gently enter the thin, ethereal layers of the upper atmosphere, feeling a soft, welcoming whisper as you return. You pass through the clouds, no longer just water vapor, but the soft, dreaming thoughts of the planetary mind. And as you descend, you feel the presence of the whole living world rising to greet you. You feel the deep, quiet life of the forests, the vast, rhythmic pulse of the oceans, the patient, steady strength of the mountains. Your awareness, carrying all the peace of the cosmos, now returns to the quiet space of your own room, and gently, softly, settles back into your own body. Feel this cosmic peace flowing into you, filling every part of your being. Feel it in your head, a deep and profound stillness, a quiet that is free from all thought, all worry. Feel this gentle, starlit energy flow down into your neck and your shoulders, washing away the last faint echoes of the day's burdens. Your arms and your hands grow heavy, warm, and deeply, profoundly still. This cosmic peace flows into your chest, into your heart, which beats with the slow, steady, and ancient rhythm of the universe itself. Your breath is the gentle, tidal breath of the planet, slow, deep, and perfectly calm. Feel this peace flow down through your body, into your stomach, your back, your hips, a warm, liquid light that soothes and heals as it moves. It flows down into your legs, your knees, your ankles, and your feet, grounding you, connecting you back to the deep, quiet, and loving presence of the earth. Your body is not a cage, but a sacred and beautiful part of the living world, your own personal garden, now filled with the quiet, peaceful light of the stars. The journey is complete, the story is told, and you have found your true place within it, a peaceful, essential, and beloved part of a living, conscious, and deeply loving universe. And now, here you are, not in a story, not on a journey, but simply here, in a quiet room, in a comfortable bed, resting in the deep and profound peace that you have found. The great cosmic story is told, and its echo has settled into a peaceful, silent resonance within you. All the grand journeys are complete. The only journey that remains is the last, short, gentle step into the deep, restorative quiet of sleep. There is nothing left to do, nothing left to understand. There is only the simple, beautiful, and profound act of being, right here, right now. Let your awareness rest gently in the space around you. Notice the quality of the silence. It is not an empty silence, but a full one. It is filled with the quiet, sleeping presence of the world. Perhaps you can hear the faint, distant sounds of the night, or the soft, rhythmic hum of your own home. Do not try to listen to these sounds. Simply notice them as you would notice distant stars in the night sky. They are the gentle background music of a world at rest. And now, let these sounds begin to fade as you turn your listening inward to an even deeper and more profound silence. Bring your awareness to the feeling of your body. Notice the points of contact between your body and the surface that supports you. Feel the gentle, reassuring weight of the blankets upon you. This is not a pressure, but a comfort. It is the feeling of being held, of being safe, of being secure. It is the gentle, constant embrace of the earth itself, holding you as you prepare for sleep. Feel the weight of your own body, a comfortable and pleasant heaviness in your limbs. Let your arms be heavy. Let your legs be heavy. Feel this gentle weight as a sign that you can finally let go, that you can release all effort and allow yourself to be completely and totally supported. You do not need to hold on to anything. The world is holding you. Now, let even this sensation of weight begin to soften, to dissolve into a feeling of gentle, peaceful floating. You are resting in a sea of perfect calm, without effort, without resistance. Gently bring your awareness to your breath. Do not try to change it. Do not try to control it. Simply notice it. Notice the feeling of the cool air as it enters, and the feeling of the warm air as it leaves. Notice the gentle, rhythmic rise and fall of your chest and your stomach. Your breath is the most ancient and loyal rhythm you have. It has been with you since the moment you were born, and it will stay with you all through the night. A steady, peaceful, and automatic anchor. It is the quiet lullaby of your own body, a gentle, tidal rhythm that is slowly, surely, and safely carrying you out to the deep, peaceful ocean of sleep. With each breath in, you are drawing in calm and quiet, and with each breath out, you are releasing the very last, faint and fading remnants of the day. There is nowhere else to be, nothing else to do, only this simple, easy, and peaceful breath flowing in and out. As you float on the gentle rhythm of your own breathing, you may notice that the last few thoughts or images begin to drift through your mind. See them as gentle, harmless clouds drifting across a vast, peaceful twilight sky, or perhaps as single fallen leaves floating by on the surface of a slow, dark, and quiet river. You do not need to follow them. You do not need to know what they mean. They are simply the last echoes of the waking world, and you can let them drift by, further and further away, until the sky of your mind is perfectly clear, perfectly calm, and perfectly still. You are now crossing the gentle threshold from a state of quiet rest into the deep, healing, and magical world of sleep. Feel yourself sinking down, gently, slowly, into a space of the most profound peace and comfort, deeper and deeper, further and further away from the waking world. You are safe, all is well. It is time to let go. It is time to rest.
And so, our long journey together finds its end, not in a final word, but in a deep and peaceful silence. The story we have shared is the story of a great remembering, the remembering that the pulse of the planet is your own pulse, that the memory of the stone is your own memory, and that the quiet, conscious, and creative presence of the universe is the very same presence that is resting here, now, in the stillness of your own being. Let this truth be your final, gentle lullaby. Let it be the quiet, steady ground beneath you as you drift into the deepest peace. You are not separate from the world. You are the world, dreaming. You are a cherished and beautiful thought in the mind of the cosmos. And now it is time for the dreamer to rest. There is nothing left to do, nothing left to be. Only the silent, healing, and profound peace of the night remains. Rest in this peace. Rest in this knowing. The story is complete. The journey is home.